Saint Olaf was born in the year 995 in the beautiful country of Norway. His father was a petty king, the ruler of a small kingdom in Norway, but the saint was never able to meet his father. Saint Olaf's father passed away before the saint was even born. Saint Olaf was raised in the Norse pagan religion. From a very young age, he started his training to become a Viking warrior. Vikings were known for their excellent fighting and sailing skills, but these Scandinavian pirates were greatly feared. They were known for their violence. The Vikings raided and pillaged towns as they conquered lands in both Western and Eastern Europe. When he was only 12 years old, Saint Olaf went on his first Viking expedition. He was given men and ships. He spent his early teenage years raiding towns and villages. He learned the tricks of the Viking trade, both on land and sea. He became known as a talented, fierce warrior. The saint later helped the English king, Ethelred, regain his throne in England, and then Saint Olaf traveled to Spain and France. It was in France where Saint Olaf encountered Christianity. He attended Christian services there, visited monasteries, and met priests, monks, nuns, and bishops. He was impressed by the great piety of the monastics and was deeply moved by the story of Christ. These experiences softened the heart of the great Viking warrior, and soon he had a strong desire to become a Christian and was baptized in Normandy, France. As Saint Olaf grew in piety, he felt that it was his duty to help spread his newfound Christian faith among his fellow Norwegian countrymen. When he returned to Norway, he found his beloved homeland divided. Some Norwegian kingdoms were ruled by chieftains and petty kings, while other parts were occupied by Danes and Swedes. Saint Olaf began negotiations with the King of Sweden. The Swedish king was going to have him marry his daughter, Saint Anna of Novgorod. But the Swedish king changed his mind and instead had Saint Anna marry the Russian Grand Prince, Saint Yaroslav the Wise, the son of Saint Vladimir the Great. The King of Sweden agreed to have Saint Olaf marry his other daughter, the beautiful princess Astrid. Saint Olaf was able to unite the various regions of Norway and defeated the Danish occupiers. At the young age of 22, Saint Olaf became king of all of Norway. Saint Olaf made Orthodox Christianity the official religion of Norway. Although there were already some Christians in Norway, most Norwegians still worshipped their pagan Norse gods. Idols of Thor, Odin, Loki, and many others were found in pagan temples throughout the country. But under Saint Olaf's reign, the idols were smashed, pagan temples were destroyed, and pagan laws were abolished. There were mass baptisms by the sea, and many churches were established all over Norway. Saint Olaf brought in missionaries from England, priests and monastics, and instituted a Christian legal system. Under his rule, Norway experienced a 10-year period of peace and prosperity. However, mutiny was afoot. Saint Olaf had many enemies who hated the new laws he had implemented. Many nobles and chieftains were extremely angry. They had lost much of the power that they had possessed before Saint Olaf came to the throne, and they were no longer allowed to participate in their pagan rituals and worship their pagan gods. When King Canute of Denmark and England heard about the unrest, he saw it as a wonderful opportunity. King Canute wanted to conquer Norway and add it to his empire. So, King Canute bribed the chieftains and nobles who were unhappy with Saint Olaf's new Christian laws. King Canute offered them expensive gifts, promised to grant them land, and positions of power if they promised to accept him as their new king. And they gladly agreed to the bribes, and King Canute arrived in Norway with a fleet of 50 ships. He was quickly accepted by the nobles and chieftains as their new king. Saint Olaf was expelled from the throne and driven into exile in Russia, where he stayed with his wife's sister, Saint Anna of Novgorod, and her husband, the Grand Prince, Saint Yaroslav the Wise. King Canute was ecstatic at how easily he had conquered Norway. He went back to England, where he preferred to reside, and left an earl to be in charge of Norway. But after only 2 years in power, the earl died in a shipwreck. When the news of the earl's death reached the ears of Saint Olaf in Russia, he knew that it was time to return to his homeland and to reclaim his rightful throne. Saint Olaf knew that his mission of making Norway a Christian nation was not yet finished. During his long, difficult journey from Russia to Norway, St. Olaf put together an army of 3,600 men. He strongly believed that only Orthodox Christian men should fight alongside him. Because of this, many men who were not Christians were turned away, as St. Olaf and his army of Christian soldiers prepared for battle. The saint prayed to Christ to help him unify Norway and to make Norway a truly Christian nation. Thorgils, an enthusiastic local Christian farmer, was inspired by St. Olaf's mission and offered to fight in the Christian army alongside the Viking king. The saint thanked Thorgils, but told him that he preferred that Thorgils care for the wounded and bury the dead after battle. St. Olaf asked Thorgils to care for his body if he also should fall in battle. St. Olaf knew that he would be facing a very large, ruthless army. The saint was correct in his assumption. The enemy's army consisted of 14,400 men, 4 times the size of St. Olaf's army. The Battle of Stiklestad, the most famous battle in Norwegian history, was about to begin. As St. Olaf and his army charged forward to face the enemy, they cried,
"Forward, forward, men of Christ, men of the cross, men of the king, forward!"
The Battle of Stiklestad was a very bloody one. Many soldiers fell on both sides. Men whom St. Olaf had once trusted and thought of as his friends now wielded swords, spears, and axes against him. These traitors were intent on preventing St. Olaf from taking back his rightful throne. During the battle, the sky and the sun became red, and it became dark as the night. A total eclipse of the sun occurred. Amidst this sudden darkness, St. Olaf fought bravely on the front lines. In the heat of the battle, St. Olaf's knee was struck with an axe. The wounded king staggered towards a rock, threw down his sword, and prayed to God to help him. Multiple men quickly surrounded the saint. He was thrust with a spear, and then a sword pierced his neck. And there, at the Battle of Stiklestad, St. Olaf departed from this earthly life and entered Christ's heavenly kingdom. At the time of his death, St. Olaf was only 35 years old. Immediately following the saint's death, miracles began to occur. One of the saint's killers, Thorir, bent over and spread a cloak over the saint's body. Thorir's fingers had been wounded in battle, and St. Olaf's blood had gotten in between them. Thorir himself later testified that his fingers immediately were healed after this occurrence. Several hours after the battle ended, Thorgils, the Christian farmer, and his son retrieved St. Olaf's body. They secretly took the body of their king to a hut on Thorgils' farm and washed it. Some of the water they had used to wash the saint's body fell onto the floor of the hut. Thorgils and his son decided to hide the saint's relics in the hut, because they had heard that his enemies wanted to burn the saint's body or throw it into the sea. Later that night, a poor blind man needed a place to sleep, and Thorgils' hut was offered as shelter for the blind man. The blind man put his hand on the floor of the hut to look for a place to rest his head, but his hat fell over his eyes. When he tried to raise his hat, he felt that his hands were wet. His fingers happened to touch his eyes, and his eyes started to itch uncontrollably. He felt extremely uncomfortable and ran out of the hut. When he opened his eyes after leaving the hut, he saw the twinkling bright stars scattered across the Norwegian night sky. The man who was once blind could now see. He ran as fast as his legs could take him up the hill to Thorgils' house. He couldn't contain his excitement as he told Thorgils and his family about the miracle that had just occurred. Thorgils was amazed and remembered that some of the water they had used to wash St. Olaf's body had fallen onto the floor in the hut, and concluded that St. Olaf must have helped heal the blind man. Thorgils and his son felt that it was their duty to keep the saint's body safe. But this task proved to be a difficult one. A mysterious light hovered over the place where they had hidden the saint's body, and they were terrified that the body would soon be discovered by the saint's enemies. Thorgils and his son went to great measures to hide St. Olaf's relics, and eventually buried his body in a sandy hill where they hoped no one would discover it. Meanwhile, King Canut's 13-year-old son, Sven, and Sven's mother, Elgiva, were put in charge of ruling Norway. But the Norwegians were very unhappy under their rule. Instead of peace and justice, the Norwegians experienced much oppression. No Norwegian was allowed to leave the country without Elgiva's permission. Every Norwegian household had to supply provisions to the palace, and the Norwegian people were forced to build the royal farmsteads. The Norwegian women were even taxed on the amount of flax they wove. The legal system also heavily favored the Danes. In court cases, one Danish witness could overrule 10 Norwegians. Many of the Norwegians, including Thorer, began to deeply regret rebelling against and killing their king. Reports of miraculous events occurring through St. Olaf's intercession soon captured the attention of the entire nation. Thorgils and his son decided that it was time to reveal the saint's secret burial place. They told their secret to Bishop Grimkel, one of the bishops that St. Olaf brought to Norway from England. St. Olaf's coffin was opened in the presence of Bishop Grimkel. As the coffin's lid was removed, a sweet fragrance filled the air. St. Olaf's face appeared fair, and his cheeks were rosy. He looked as though he was sleeping peacefully. Those present also noticed that even his hair and fingernails had grown. King Sven and his mother, Elgiva, were also present at the uncovering of the relics, but they both tried to downplay the miracle and claimed that the sandy soil might have caused the body to decompose slowly. When Bishop Grimkel challenged them to explain the growth of St. Olaf's nails and hair, Elgiva became extremely angry.
I would only believe in Olaf's sanctity if his hair does not burn.
So, Bishop Grimkel snipped off some of St. Olaf's long hair. He made the sign of the cross over the censer and sprinkled incense into it. Then the bishop had fire brought in a censer. Then he placed St. Olaf's hair into the fire. The fire consumed all of the incense, but the hair would not burn. He presented the unburnt hair to King Sven, Elgiva, and the others who were present. They could all clearly see that the hair was not consumed. But still, Elgiva was not convinced and demanded another demonstration. But Bishop Grimkel had had enough and silenced her. He gave her many severe reproaches for her unbelief. After these events, King Sven and Elgiva could not deny that St. Olaf was indeed a holy man of God. Even St. Olaf's rival, King Canute, could not argue with this fact. The Norwegians eventually expelled the Danes from power and made St. Olaf's son, Magnus, the new king of Norway. St. Olaf's holiness and miracles inspired many Norwegians to forsake their Norse pagan gods and to embrace the Christian faith. His mission of converting his fellow countrymen finally was achieved. Norway soon became a Christian nation. His coffin was brought to St. Clement's Church in Trondheim, Norway, and St. Olaf's relics became one of the most popular pilgrimage sites in Northern Europe. Soon, churches and shrines dedicated to St. Olaf were built in Norway, England, Sweden, Ireland, Russia, and even in the great cities of Rome and Constantinople. Throughout his life, St. Olaf led many Norwegians to the Christian faith. Yet, his Christian laws sparked hostility, resentment, and ultimately led to his betrayal, exile, and death. However, it was only after St. Olaf's repose that the entire nation of Norway embraced Christianity, and his life and death inspired thousands of people throughout the world. Even his adversaries and the very men who killed him repented. The life and death of St. Olaf remind us that Christ can use even the darkest, most tragic events to draw others closer to him. To this day, Norwegians honor St. Olaf as a great national hero and call him the eternal king of Norway. Soon after his death, St. Olaf became the official patron saint of his beloved homeland. Holy St. Olaf of Norway, pray to Christ for us.
My name is Ruth Snowgren. I'm the founder of the California Pilgrim YouTube channel and the illustrator behind all of the drawings that you see in the Draw the Life of a Saint series. I'm really excited to announce that I just created a brand new children's book series called Grandma's Storybook of Saints. And I just released the very first book in the series. It's called The Saint in Our Kitchen, Saint Frosinos the Cook. In this book, your child is going to learn all about the life of the patron saint of cooks. Saint Frosinos was a humble, pious monk who was given the obedience to cook all of the meals for all of the monks of the monastery. His life teaches us a valuable lesson in humility. In this book, your child is also going to be taken on a little kitchen adventure. The bishop is coming to town and the Cuthbert family is getting dinner all prepared. But a kitchen disaster occurs. Will the Cuthbert family's dinner be saved? To find out, click the link in the description box below to order your copy of The Saint in Our Kitchen today. Thanks for watching.